We're speaking about the origins of evil, and we're using several different kinds of vehicles to do this. Our primary vehicle, distant though we may be from it, is mythology. Specifically, right now we're working with the temptation and fall story in the book of Genesis, and we're looking at it as the mystery schools would look at it. We are looking almost simplistically at the same time at a philosophy of time. We're going to continue, we're going to start out with that next time. I didn't get that far again this time. It's all slow and difficult. It's funny, Earl and Dagmar aren't here tonight. No, we're going. We're fine. We left off last time talking about the hardening effects of precedents or of first instances. How they set the pace or the tempo, or they make firm the way that everything else is going to follow for a long time. And toward the end of the last talk, we talked about the more extreme kind of hardening that happens when we do something out of time by doing it too early. Just like doing something too soon causes delays, this causes extreme hardening. We were looking at this in terms of seeing the temptation and fall as part of or in the Lemurian epoch, when we were starting that deep descent into matter. And the consequence of our activity at that time was extreme hardness and extreme involvement in matter, so far into matter that it was beyond the intention and even the evolutionary capacity of the spiritual beings that were guiding us. And we looked at that, and we're going to look even more as we deal with the ultimate consequences of this. We looked at it as pain and suffering and sorrow and all of the things that are a common experience to all of us. It's pretty clear, it takes only a glance into nature to see that we are out of harmony or out of time. Most of the human things, human creations are ugly. Not only are they ugly, they are destructive to the things around them. Everything else in the economy of nature seems to help everything else out. But human things are all impedimental or all destructive. Going even further, there are invisible effects that turn out to have visible consequences when we think of all of the pollution that we put into the cosmos and all of the deathly effects that has, especially things like radioactivity that you can almost never see without clairvoyance. In all of this, we've been looking a little bit at the different kinds of psychologies that are associated with doing things fast or slow, or doing things too early or too late, or being a person of the future or a person of the past. And we're going to do more of that next time again. But right now, I want to do a little sort of review of all of the things that were in that first moment called temptation and fall. And by looking at all of those things together, we can see what we're up against in terms of redemption. If we know all of the things that we have hardened and all of the things that we have put ourselves into more deeply than was intended, we at least know what we're dealing with. So it's going to be a really simple 5 or 6 part enumeration. I might even make a list to enumerate a list. I've got this blackboard. I've got to put something on it. You get those kinds of feelings that you make something, you have to use it. It's going to be very simple to the point of being simplistic, and it's going to be highly speculative. And it's going to be unassumingly speculative because I can't make definitive statements, because definitive statements about some of these matters would require not only seership, but seership of an extremely high order, and I just don't have that. The good thing about it is that even though everything we say is going to be adventurously speculative, I don't have any strong feelings about any of the issues, and I don't have any strong opinions, any strong attachments, and so I'm pretty free to fly and will throw a lot of ideas around just to think about them. All right, first let's look at matter itself before looking at the descent of matter. We have said that in the Lemurian epoch, the planet Earth was separated within or thrown off within the solar system, and it began condensing into the solids, liquids, and gases that we know, and that we don't know actually because so many of them are opaque. In the natural state of matter, things are the solid state. Everything is primarily crystalline. Everything that's crystalline is transparent, or at least translucent, and our opaque view of things is very rare. Actually, the whole world is in a way supposed to be a crystal, and it's sort of like we have darkened it up. All right, the issue here is that we as humans are co-creators. And as co-creators, our peremptory creative activity, did that affect the materialization of the solar cosmos, and if so, how much? Meaning to say, are the effects of our blunder, are they cosmic in their scope? If we state it another way, can we say, did our jumping the gun harden the cosmos more than the cosmos was intended to harden? At this point, I tend to think that yes, we did harden the cosmos more than was intended, but there are limits to our effect, and fortunately from cosmology and spiritual philosophy, there are all kinds of hints about the subjects. First of all, if we can take a teleological look at things. Seers of all ages, of all times, have reported or have recorded that every realm has 7 major subdivisions. We won't go into the philosophy of why that is so, if it is so, but it seems pretty universal that there are 7 subdivisions. Now, it would seem very peculiar if the physical world would only have the 4 etheric subdivisions and not the solids, liquids, and gases. So we're on pretty sound ground in concluding that we didn't precipitate any unintended or any unwanted states of existence. Now, that's fairly reasonable. Going a little further with this, it's very difficult to put into words, but the issue is how much of the cosmos was meant to come into solids, liquids, and gases. Or put in another way, how much of light was to be precipitated through the ethers into the denser realms. The evolution is the same, and it takes place the same on different levels. There is an entire science of astronomy or physics or astrophysics that is called spectroscopy. And there is a spectrography too, I guess, where you graph the results, but I don't know what exactly those folks do. But in spectroscopy, the science studies the light that is emanated from different stars. And by studying that light as it breaks down, you can tell what elements, like iron or nickel or such like that, are present on other stars, other solar systems, and you get an idea of what their composition or what their evolution is like. Not surprisingly, most of the simple elements are found in all star systems. They are shifted a little bit from one star to another so that they have a slightly different character, but the atomic states are the same. It's the same spiritual reality, so one would expect that it would all be the same. But the question is, when things condense out of light to actually become dense material, how much of it was intended to be dense material? It's a difficult question. Now, it's true that the outer planets, which were condensed and thrown off within the solar system first and before the Earth, are made up of primarily the simple elements. And for the most part, they are just gases. So one would tend to think that maybe all of the heavier elements like, beyond lead weren't intended to even be, that the evolution through the mineral kingdom wasn't intended to go that far, and that perhaps it wasn't intended that it should get that far into a solid state. However, Mars comes up as the shining warrior. Mars, for some strange reason, astronomers and physicists and geochemists have always liked Mars because Mars has clues for everything. And in this case, the clue is that Mars is not like the outer planets. Mars is a planet that has a metallic core. And having a metallic core means that it has a lot of the higher or the multi-shell elements as part of its composition. But Mars had to have been thrown off in the stellar nebula before the Earth. And as a consequence, Mars was precipitated before what we are calling the fall of humanity. Therefore, it is reasonably safe to assume that it was intended that there were supposed to be at least some of the metals condensed out of the light, though maybe not carried as far as they have all gone. That's not a hard thing to take at all. I suppose most people aren't even interested in this, for me, it's sort of like a detective game. It's a really interesting thing. It's a really fascinating thing because this is something that is important in our existence, whether we know it or not. It gets, our interactions and what parts of the mineral kingdom we interact with and how they interact with us is an exceedingly important thing. For example, people, I went to an anthroposophical doctor at one time, and he did a hair test on me. And he says, yes, you've been doing your spiritual exercise because you've got a lot of gold in your hair. They take the study of the trace minerals that are in the hair. And actually, we're interacting with the mineral kingdom all the time. There is that wonderful science where occultism and physical science seem to come together, and that is biochemistry. In biochemistry, you can trace the developments of every stage of the fetus to various biochemical elements, basically 12 cell salts and basic metals enter in at different times in the whole embryonic process, and what we become, like if we're going to have bad vision or if we're going to be weak in one kind of system or another, this is indicated by how well our mother, usually the mother, could deal with certain kinds of minerals. On the other hand, we're talking here now about how our consciousness interacts and works on the minerals. It's a creative thing too. Now, what is not easy, we've determined that we haven't made any special realms, and that we haven't precipitated the whole mineral evolution in ways that it wasn't intended in the planetary development. Those were fairly easy to determine. But what is not easy to determine is how dense the materializations were intended to be. Now, a normal material scientist would hear a statement like that and say, that's crazy talk. Like, what do you mean, how dense was everything intended to be? Material science believes that the laws of the cosmos are constant and they are unchanging, and that stuff is stuff no matter where you are. So they would claim that something like a half-life is going to always be the same length. That if something decomposes by radioactive decay, that it's always going to be so much within a certain amount of time. Now, spiritual science doesn't find concord with that. Spiritual science claims, or at least seems to imply, that some of the laws change, and that there are different rates of change at different times of evolution, which is really interesting. And there are some claims that are made from almost everybody in spiritual science, not necessarily about the laws changing, but about the density of matter. And they claim that the density of matter, in fact, does change. In fact, the statement is made that a few hundreds of thousands of years ago, the solar system was more dense than it is now. So this might even be what some of the shifts mean that spectroscopy notes. Maybe a diamond on a planet from Andromeda is a harder or a softer diamond than a diamond on the planet Earth. Now, in order that what we're saying here is something really big in terms of the quality of consciousness. In order to say that matter was denser a few hundreds of thousands of years ago, this means that someone has to have a perception that goes over that span of time and has to have a perception that is exceedingly accurate, not just like saying, well, it's a cold summer this summer, but it has to be exceedingly accurate, and it has to be a consciousness that has an objectivity that in effect gets outside of the whole process, so that it can know that things were more or less hard. Now, if all of the speculation or all of the ideas about the solar system seems phenomenal, it doesn't seem nearly as phenomenal to me as somebody having that kind of observational ability and that kind of objectivity to effectually be outside of a process so that objective statements can be made about a process that is as slow and as subtle as our the solar system, solar evolution. That's just remarkable to me. Now, this doesn't mean that the laws necessarily change. It doesn't mean that the scheme of evolution necessarily changes. We have a parallel from our own imagination. If we, suppose we wanted to imagine a solar system, and within that solar system there were all kinds of interactions taking place, and if we were imagining that, we could bring that imagination to greater and greater and greater density, but the system wouldn't necessarily have to change. The same interactions could be there, it's just that they would be more graphic and they would become more mechanical as they became more densified and materialized. So this is saying the whole cosmology is something that carries on, whether it is turgid because of our having slowed it down by jumping the gun and causing a greater hardness or a greater densification, the process still goes on. Now, there is something like evidence, or at least collaboration or internal consistency in spiritual science to show that this is true. It's going to be a strange line of reasoning, but since it's really a speculative night tonight, we can go for strange lines of reasoning. Supposedly, this is taught by all schools of spiritual philosophy, East and West, ancient and modern, that supposedly at one time, when we were really in the mire as far as our evolutionary advancement, when we were really stuck and going slow, we got help from human beings that were previously associated with the evolution on Venus and Mercury. And they were doing something like a penance. Somehow they got behind in their evolution. They began to lag in their evolution, and that by making a special effort to help us get out of matter, they were able to redeem or to get back on pace with their evolution. Now, Venus and Mercury are internal to the Earth, and the Mercurians and Venusians were more advanced than us, and for them to have been laggard, that would likely imply that Venus and Mercury were, as a consequence of our fall, made to become more dense than was intended, and the consequence of that was that the Mercurians and the Venusians tended to straggle or fall behind and didn't keep pace with things. So there is some kind of implication that says, that there is something true like this. So at any rate, we as co-creators have hardened or densified our solar system more than was intended, so that the rate of progress is much slower. I can't speculate about the consequence of this with regard to other realms, because my being, like having my finger on what's happening in all the other realms, I'm just not up to that tonight. So I'm sure that it is true that we do experience what happens in the physical affects what happens in the etheric or in the desire world or all the other worlds that we act in at the same time, and what happens in the other worlds affect the physical. But exactly how the other realms are affected by our hardening of the material, I don't know. Tim might be able to offer something from Steiner on that. Do you have any thumbnail thing to say on that right? Okay, I'm sure he has somewhere. That's the kind of thing that he would comment on. So there probably was some effect, but not that much. So we've looked at materialization. I'm tired tonight, and so I'm liable to make even worse spelling errors than normal. And I've been reading the two husbands of Donna Floor. And the man is just amazing. He's got this huge vocabulary. He sends me to the dictionary, and I don't get more than an hour a day to read. And he sends me to the dictionary at least 3 or 4 times. And he sent me actually to the Oxford Unabridged to find some of the words in there. But at the same time, he has this masterful way with words to describe people that is profane but artistically beautiful. He's describing this one woman who is just a real tartar of a woman, and she's just nasty, and he describes her through the eyes of the man sitting next to her and calls her a pestilent pisspot. And you're reading along and you run in, it just broke me up. And it had me laughing all along. All right, at any rate, let's look at the next thing on the list, and that is descent into matter. Jeez, I have this huge task that's taking me many hours to do. It's like walking across the Sahara very, very slowly. And I have become almost compulsive about it, and so that I wouldn't let the T's, I wouldn't even put the R down without having first crossed the T's. And it's really interesting to watch the behavior as it comes out. How deep into the chemical region was humanity intended to evolve? Stated another way, were we really intended to have solid physical bodies? Or maybe only gaseous and liquid bodies? Or maybe only gaseous? Or maybe even only chemical ether bodies? It's not an easy question. Not easy at all without clairvoyance. Some investigators, such as Rudolf Steiner, claim that some of humanity, those symbolized by Abel, never fell. And as a consequence, they do not incarnate into dense physical bodies like these. Only in rare cases do they, as a sacrifice, come here to help us. And he mentions some of those cases. He has the view that there were 2 Jesus children, and that at a certain age that they combined, and that the combined bodies, that there was one of the Jesus children died, and some of the how would you say it? Some of the imprints, if not the substance of some of the vehicles, were incorporated into the other Jesus child to make it a fit vehicle for the Christ when the Christ incarnated. Another example that Rudolf Steiner gives is that remarkable young man called Caspar Hauser, who was locked in a basement from infancy on, and when he came out, he was prodigious in his sense abilities. He could see stars in the daytime, but he did not fit into the material world at all. He was just like an unfallen Lemurian. He did everything by memory, and he had no knack or understanding. He couldn't figure out how people who were as short as we are could build buildings that were several stories tall. He didn't have experience of this kind of world. What usually happens with these kind of people is they're usually brought in to be neutral third parties between different warring factions, because nobody has any dibs on them, or nobody has any special hawks on their attention. What usually happens is, instead of being a commonly agreed person to be a leader for all of the different factions or warring parties usually agree that this is a third party, and they all decide that they want to kill the third party, and there is a kind of unification in destruction. And that is really very interesting, because it is the Cain and Abel story all over again every time there is an opportunity to do it, especially if it was with the one of the Jesus children. But all of that aside, very rarely do the unfallen, when they incarnate, very rarely do they live much beyond puberty, which in itself is a interesting conception. So there are people then that are apparently unfallen, but nobody, not even Rudolf Steiner, says what their life cycles are like. That is, when they're not here as Caspar Hauser, what were they doing? They certainly weren't lolling around in the heaven worlds waiting for us to catch up. So that's an interesting question. How deep was their descent supposed to be? My view on this is, and this is going to be some more crazy kind of logic again. First of all, I can't completely throw out, but I don't find much concord with the idea of parallel universes. That is to say, that at the same time that this world is here that we know and are so familiar with its solids, liquids, and gases, that at the same time we're not aware of it, but there is actually parallel to this another world with solids, liquids, and gases that is not so dense as this, and that the properties and laws of that other parallel physical world are slightly different than this world. That is the view that some people hold, and I have a hard time with it. I really have a difficult time with it. I tend to think that worlds are worlds, and they're common to all. And there may be other worlds that we are not even part of, but why would there be a special set of solids, liquids, and gases for some people and not for others? It doesn't make sense to me, but I won't go into it, because it could be possible. All right. My inference is that everybody, including the unfallen, must incarnate into bodies that are at least gaseous. And so I think that all the Caspar Hausers live in gas bodies. This is an unusual notion, and it gets into a lot of things that I haven't carried way out, or I haven't carried far out at all, though I've thought about them for a number of years. And that deals with various things in the whole cosmological process. First of all, in order to build the body in any realm or sub-realm or major division of a realm or whatever, you have to have an accumulated experience of that realm. And that accumulated experience is usually called a seed atom or a seed principle. That from the very beginning of our evolution when the solar cosmos was no more dense than a thought, we have experienced form, we have experienced physical matter right away from the beginning, even when maybe the gods were making thought snowballs out of us or something like that. It's a little bit profane to say it that way, but so that this cumulative experience is what gives us the ability to work with form. And you have to have this in order to work with form. Even Christ could not make a physical body like this because Christ's evolution never had any experience of a dense physical body. And because of that, the body of Jesus had to be used. There had to be a borrowing. But so it seems then that if we have physical vehicles, and that means that everybody must have physical vehicles, including the Casper Hausers that come to birth, and that so they must have some experience of form. It's possible that it could be only as dense as the chemical ether, which would be as dense as a magnetic field, but there's something else that makes it a little bit more clear, and that is the notion of soul. And it's one of those words that's hard to understand or that has so many meanings. The way I'm using the word now is soul is the essence of experience from any given realm, which essence is absorbed and assimilated into the spirit until it becomes character within the spirit itself. And that the spirit is fed and it grows by soul through experience. Now, even though the soul is eventually assimilated into the spirit and becomes spirit, the effects of soulful experiences that we have gotten the essence out of doing something or feeling something or something like that, the essence of that experience lives in the bodies. That is to say, the more physical experience someone has and gains from it, the better they can build physical bodies, and they have soulful physical bodies. And the same thing with the other levels of soul. Now, so the soul remains... Hello, Jerry. The soul stuff, then, even in its essential state, remains in the bodies even after some of the soul material has been assimilated into the spirit. Now, the way seers describe this, they claim that the kind of soulful experiences that we get from emotions and desires and feelings they're called emotional soul. And the kind of experience or the essence or the soul experience that we get from vital experience in the ethers from action or from life or from perception or from transmission is called intellectual soul. And that the experience that we get from impacts in the physical, from experiencing form, experiencing gross outer substance, is called conscious soul. The emotional soul, since the desire body is a reflection of the human spirit, goes into the and someone who has a lot of emotional soul is what you would call a colorful spirit. That even in the ideas that one carries in the self, those ideas are vivid with color, and they have the character of many different kinds of feel to them. The intellectual soul, since the etheric body is the reflective projection of the life spirit, gets assimilated into the life spirit. And finally, the conscious soul gets assimilated into the divine spirit. A lot of this has to do with our waking consciousness. In fact, what happens, the impacts in the physical world literally wake us up. They can be very gentle impacts, like the scent of a perfume, or being able to distinguish one color from another, or having a very gentle sense of touch, is where the waking of consciousness comes. In fact, it is the relationship of the desire body and the etheric body for the control of the physical body that results in all of our waking consciousness. The desires would have us do this and this and this and this. The etheric would have us basically just vegetate in a way and be very peaceful. And in the struggle between the building up of the body and the preservative quality of the life spirit, as in creator, preserver, and destroyer, the preserver quality of the life spirit would just perpetuate and just have this lovely, peaceful, blissful, living life. The desire body, on the other hand, would just, have us kill every brain cell and break down all of our muscles doing something all the time. And in the struggle to find a happy medium between the two of them, the battlefield where our consciousness is awakened is in the physical body, and the conscious soul, or the basic awareness of our will to be, because the divine spirit is the quality of will, that all comes about as a consequence of this struggle. Now, the thing is that we've been talking about soul as residing in the bodies even after some of it has been assimilated into the spirit, and it resides within bodies from incarnation to incarnation to incarnation, so that the person has almost like a soulful immortality. That someone who has done a lot of service and has had a lot of experience and has learned a lot from it carries with themselves the soul from all of their past lives. So whoever has a more rich experience has more soul to carry through. Now, it's found, the seers claim that it's found in different regions. The emotional soul is found in the three highest regions of the desire body, the regions of soul light, soul life, and soul power. The intellectual soul is found in the two highest regions of the etheric body. This is why one has to be very careful about leaving the body, because the intellectual soul in the two highest regions of the etheric body is what we need for sense perception and memory and the ability to think and the ability to carry out motivations, and we don't want to take that which takes care of the physical body. You know that if you take your etheric body and you stratify it in the wrong way, you can leave yourself as a mineral. You know what I mean? If you want to take the life ether along, then all you're left with is basically something that is a hard form. And this happens with some people. There are exercises that you can do to stratify it, but what you want to do is you want the stratification to be with the two highest ethers and separate from the two lower ethers. The intellectual ethers you want to take with you, because the desire body is too much like a baby. It's undeveloped yet. You cannot function in the inner worlds in your desire body because it's just not that far along in its evolution. It's only in its second stage of evolution, whereas the physical body is in its fourth stage and the etheric is in its third. So then where is the conscious soul? If these are the two highest ethers and these are the three highest parts of the desire world, this must mean that the conscious soul must be in the highest part of the solids, liquids, and gases. And that must mean that somewhere in us might be giving you a very high compliment. But for this reason, I think that the unfallen, those who don't enter into a body like this, probably have an aerial existence. You know, because they have to do something to develop their conscious soul. Only they don't need the experiences quite as gross as the experiences we get. This is, I told you, it was a wild speculative night tonight. It has not a lot of things that many people are interested in, but they're really, to me, fascinating ideas. Okay. So it seems to me that everybody has to come to birth at least as deep as the gases. Now this, in terms of scriptural evidence talking about the consciousness of the spirit or the soul being in the air or in the gas, or von Hellman's experiments and all of his statements about the spirit being in the gas are really quite interesting. And there are a lot of things that are worth looking into in all of this. All right. Despite all the speculation about unfallen humans, the fact is that we have fallen so that we know that we come all the way into a dense, solid physical body. Especially when you try to move it and it doesn't want to move, or when you've moved it too much and it aches, you know that you're in the physical. But how far in the physical were we intended? It seems to me that our attachment and the degree that we have gotten into the physical is exceedingly overdone. So much so that the unconscious projections of the spirit that function as instinct, that are sleeping in the matter itself, we're even in touch with that. You know what I'm talking about? The will of the flesh, which has now we're not talking about desire here. We're just talking about the flesh itself has its own law and its own agenda and the whole business. And it seems that we have gotten ourselves so into our bodies and so removed from the spirit that becomes a strong influence in our life. Moreover, even if it was intended that we had physical bodies, we have hardened them, and we've hardened them much more than was ever intended to the effect that we have become numb. And this is one of the effects of the fall into matter. The fall into matter is when we chose to project our energy into the realm of experience. We were misled by the Lucifers, but we followed, and we followed enough times so that it became a whole way of life for us. We got so far into the physical that we became numb to the intuition. And so a good deal of our fallen state is that we must experience things too many times. We make the same dumb mistakes again and again and again and again because we don't let it sink in. And this is going to be the case until we open ourselves to intuition and learn things without having to do them over so many times and to be so stupid about it. And the funny thing about all of this is that it left us with an extremely limited, a one-sided kind of expression. This is more than just the separation of the sexes, but we'll come to that in just a second. It left us so that we could only see the outside of things. Now, that's what it says when we saw our nakedness and we were ashamed, because we still had some faint glimmering of inner consciousness, and then when our eyes were opened and all we're seeing is the outside, there was a shame about that. And the irony was that we tried to cover it up, which means you were trying to cover ignorance with ignorance. You see what I'm trying to say? It's a most unusual kind of thought. It wasn't because our bodies were ugly. Our bodies weren't, an animal's body isn't ugly. You look at an animal's body, it's quite a beautiful thing, and ours was also. It was that the shame was not for the ugliness of a body, but for seeing only the outside of it and not the glory, the intelligence that produced that form from the inside. This also means then that since our experience comes from being so attached to the body, literally the curse of by the sweat of your brow is the way that you're going to learn things is not a curse. It's just a statement of how things are. Just moving the physical around is a sweaty prospect. Okay. Just to repeat, the redemption of our descent into matter can only come when we balance sensory experience with intuition. That until we listen for the meaning of experiences or choose the experiences that are likely to be meaningful on the basis of intuition, we are going to remain in a fallen state. Anyone who has divine guidance is someone who is on the way out of material, being hooked on material. The little Garden of Eden story also implies that we were not only aware of our externality, our brazen externality, but it was also that we were aware of our incompleteness at our sexual differentiation, meaning to say that we were only half people. We were either males or females, and there was this is a second kind of shame that comes to it. And that brings us to the next thing that we're enumerating in our little list here of things in the temptation and fall, and that is creation and and sexuality were begun in Lemuria, and in that precedent-setting time and in that jumping of the gun time, they were also hardened, so that sexual differentiation, sexual participation, and general creativity were hardened. Now, when it talks about the separation of the sexes, it doesn't mean like that joking thing that is said in Plato in the Symposium where a great knife was took in and cut us in half. This was done by the etheric body, by a manifestation of polarization in the etheric body. It happens, there are fish in Mexico, for example, that where the separation of the sexes goes back and forth numerous times in life. That there are these fish that most of their existence they are females. But sometimes when they need to have males for procreation, something happens inside that the fish starts secreting endocrines. And these hormones, again, they're manifestations from the etheric body. The hormones change some of the female fish into male fish, and they develop male genitalia, and they inseminate the eggs, and then things switch back, and they go back to all being females again. And so the separation of the sexes is not something like, that there were two distinct classes of people made and that there was a mold for each of them. It is a matter of the polarization of the consciousness in the etheric body. One can see, I don't want to make any prejudicial statement, but one can see that a lot of gay people, because of their hormone makeup, are transsexual. That they take on the characteristics of the other sex because they have done things to polarize their etheric body, and they have hormonal conditions so that they, in effect, look and act, and their musculature and the way the nerves move the muscles are like the other sex. And this is exactly what happened in us. And the intention of this, we knew that we were going to be divided people, that the candle was burned at both ends. Part of the light of the spinal fire was turned downward, and it was a flame coming out of the region of the genitals, and part of it came at the other end of the candle in the voice box and in the brain, and that was to be used for developing organs for spiritual expression. Now, the thing is, we chose to overemphasize the bottom end of the candle, the bottom end of the spine, so that we began manifesting sexuality when it wasn't necessary. It became something like you see, I don't know how to say it. Every sexual act is a creative act. And as such, it is a replication of the creation of the entire cosmos. I don't want to go into it because it would be a whole long aside, but everything that takes place in human sexuality, from the warming up to it, to the sexual act itself, to the denouement afterwards, is exactly a replication of what happens in the creation of the cosmos. It's on a very gross material level, but somehow the Lucifers got us fixated on that. And we wanted to become immortal creators. And we wanted to experience that creative thing, and we thought that if we could get it right, we could become that. It wasn't only just the building of physical bodies. It's like we had, it's almost a lemming-like thing that we as human beings have about sexuality. We have an urgency We have this great demand that we have to do this, and that is a habit. It's like we realize there's something divine in it, but we haven't gotten the notion that that's not the end where the divinity is expressed. The divinity is expressed at the other end, and in this urgent quest to satisfy our divinity or our creativity, or to be unified or to be one with God in some kind of sexual union, we've kept turning the sexual energy downward, and this made us more and more material creatures. It hardened us. It made us creatures of sensualism, made us creatures of desire, and in effect, that kind of intensity denies its own purpose. You cloy all of the senses by passionately overdoing them. Probably to be an ascetic is to be the ultimate aesthete, because if you eat a lot of rich cheese and very tasteful wines, that isn't where you're developing a real sense of taste. But if you can tell the difference between one bowl of oatmeal and another, you've got a really delicate sense of taste. And, you know, anybody can tell that this wine is more sour than that wine. You know what I'm trying to say, that sensualism is not where it's at. So at any rate, we got this quality of urgency about us. This is an emergency. We have to do this. We have to do this. And so this hardened us. This is one of the things that got hardened. The creation itself was slowed down, and we became sensualists. This makes it obvious then that if there is to be any redemption from our fallen state, a lot of the creative energy has to be taken away from fruitless sexual expression and redirected into creative things, into things that serve the spirit rather than things that serve the personality. This brings us, you know, there's sort of a desperation and a loneliness and a sensualism that is behind the sexual drive, but this brings us to the next thing that is along the line, that it isn't just a sexual need, as some people call it, this urgency to repeat the creative act again and again. There is desire. Desire and passion. Meaning to say, some of the things that became hardened in us are the desires and the effects of the desires. Now here we're going to talk about a whole nexus of things that are all tied together. It's not quite so discrete as it has been all along up to this point. The Lemurian epoch, the time of the temptation and fall, was a recapitulation of the moon period. And during the moon period, we went through our animal existence. We learned desire and motivation to be able to move and go places and to experience things. So in the Lemurian epoch, we were recapitulating an animal-like human state. And so we were reliving that lunar kind of existence. Now, how to say this? The desire body, in as many people who were ready, was stratified. It was stratified so that the three highest ethers were three highest realms of the desire body were separated from the four lowest realms of the desire body. And this was done so that something, we've mentioned this before, something like a pseudo-self could be reflected or inculcated into the higher desire body to be a reactive mechanism to take care of us until the spirit itself, the human spirit, the focus of the ego, could be brought, ego with a capital E or a self with a capital S, not in the lower sense, until it could be brought into the personal vehicles, and we would then be divines living in the physical, capable of carrying things out. Now the idea was that the ones who had experienced enough emotions had enough emotional soul. And since for the most part they were innocent, and for the most part they were guided through their emotional experiences by the angels, the higher part of the desire body, they figured, would be pure enough, would be virtuous enough to carry the day until the spirit came in. But what happened when the Lucifers took over is that the Lucifers got us into the experience of the lower part of the desire body, and experiencing in the lower part of the desire world where there are coarse sensual passions, because we wanted more and more of that experience of that reality of the physical world. And so eventually you become like what you do. And if you experience more and more of coarser desires, it tinges even the soul stuff of the higher desire body. And it could then be perverted so that it had something like its own kind of selfish self. And so one of the things that happened then is that desire itself became an end. And it became a self-indulgent end. And that comes to a really important thing, because there's a different kind of hardening. When we've talked about physical matter and all those speculative things and our descent into matter, those were one thing. But when we're talking about passion and desire, we're talking about a different kind of hardening. We're talking about character hardening. Any time anyone indulges in any kind of desire, it hardens the character. Not the physical body so much, it hardens. You know, there are people that seem to be feelingless, or people who don't care about anyone else. That is the consequence of indulging in desire. Now, this principle is not a respecter of the kinds of desires. We can harden ourselves in vanity if we indulge ourselves in doing good things. And if we can even indulge ourselves in smiling at other people. And so our smiles, in fact, become false. And so any time we indulge, instead of just doing and, keep it clean, keep it clear so the spirit can come through without resistance, any time we indulge in any kind of desire, we harden. Now, there are several agencies for clearing the hardening. One is an influx from the life spirit called grace. And when a person has an experience of grace, the love comes through so strongly that the amount of softening that takes place is enormous. But another way is by refeeling. Instead of stonewalling against our desires, if we feel the consequences of our desires as other people feel them, which is what normally happens after death, or when there's been an experience where we finally understand how much we've harmed somebody, when that takes place, we then start feeling things and we become softer people. However, the most common agency for softening is pain. So in our little Garden of Eden story, when it says it is by pain and suffering and sorrow that you are going to learn, it is exactly true. Once we go down the path of hardening ourselves by indulgence, we are guaranteeing that we have to have pain in order to soften us up. There is no other way. Anguish, sorrow, whatever we need. Now, what happened was that in the stratified, there's an interesting sidelight in all of this. This says that the most dangerous kinds of desires are the things that we associate with the most benign and good things that we do. If we take pride in virtue, if we become prigs or casuistrists, hard words to say, that we're making ourselves into something that is exceedingly subtle. The hardness is exceedingly hard to cure. That there's something about the somebody who indulges in coarse desires becomes a coarse person. It's like concrete that's got too much gravel in it. It breaks apart relatively easy. But if you indulge yourself in finer desires, the subtle vanities, in fact, what even happens, you'll look at yourself and say, my, aren't I a nice, sweet person? And when you do that, you don't even see your own, your own stuff. And in doing that, it produces the most treacherous kind of hardening of all. All right, but at any rate, we develop this second self, the lower self, the false self. It's not something we want to do away with, but it's certainly something we want to tame, and it's something that we want to be a partner to our true self, because otherwise we wouldn't have any inner dialogue. Who would we have to talk to? You know what I mean? If there isn't somebody to ask the questions, if you're just filled with answers, there's nobody to ask the questions. The spirit needs the second self, and it needs the perceptions just as the perceptions need the intuition from the spirit. So we're not talking about trying to destroy a lower self or something like that. We're talking about trying to tame it. But what happens is another thing that was born in the Lemurian epoch was concrete thinking, or concrete mind. That is to say that all the way before this, until the times of Lemuria, we never had the ability to concretely think and delineate. The concrete mind was meant to be the lens or the lens mirror whereby the spirit projected its creations into the phenomenal world and took the results of the experiences back into itself. Thinking, Mercury was the servant of the gods. Our concrete mind is the closest vehicle that we have to the realms of spirit. But what happened is we got the concrete mind serving the lower self. So that, in effect, our minds and our baser self-centered desires have coalesced into a real, how would you say it, an almost sinister complex of a personal self that is very separative and very self-serving. One of the dangers in all of this is, because everything is so focused on matter, and everything is so focused on hardening, all of our thinking is materialistic thought. Almost all of it. And when, I don't, even in this room where there are a lot of very aspiring people, and in this room where we are people that have faith and have some sensitivity to spirit, we're still materialists. We still think of things in graphic, material ways, and we don't think in the way of the Spirit. My ways are not your ways, or the ways of God are strange to the ways of humans. And so one of the dangers is that our mind is stretched so much in the direction of materialism and in the direction of selfish materialism that we are almost in danger of snapping, because it has pulled away. This is a real, it didn't start off that way, but it has become a real strong rebellion against the Spirit. So somehow we have to let go of matter, and we in Spirit have to take control of our thinking process. Because right now our mind has a mind of its own, and it thinks about what it wants to think about. And it's all tied up with desire, it's all tied up with vanity, and, it's rare that we're really in touch with, well, how do we say it? Rare that we're really in our right mind. That is when we are in the Spirit and we know what the right thing to do is, or what a right thing to do, or a beautiful thing to do is. We have to believe that our minds are capable of something other than material thought. We have to have faith and start thinking about things as though God would, as in a manner that God would think about things, because that, that's an important thing. Or we're just going to get more and more in, we really are materialistic. And we have to let go of that, or we'll never see the spiritual reality. A lot of this is not always in, what part of our unconscious nature is in the baser lower self and what part is in the higher self, and the interactions are really interesting. I think that every spiritual student should read Psychopathology and Everyday Living by Sigmund Freud. And it's the one that talks about all the Freudian slips and all the symptomatic actions and such like that. It's written beautifully. It's an essay that is almost faultless in style and in grammar, and it's just a joy to read it. And then you start seeing what all of your Freudian slips are, and it indicates what you have going on underneath the surface and what a lot of your motivations are. And it's a really valuable thing to do. And what's even more important is that when the things are exposed to you, it is the intuition that sees the real truth of things, and it is the intuition that really wants it to be exposed. Rather than, again, Adam and Eve covered themselves, rather than exposing themselves, and rather than seeing the beauty of it. It works on all levels. All right. Now, the last thing that we could say that somewhere in here, lower self was developed. And the last thing is, Jerry is vindicated. He knew he was going to be vindicated all along. He gets an idea and he hangs on to it because he knows it's right. Birth of self with a capital S. We think of smaller S on this one. Clearly, self is spirit, and spirit can't be sick, or spirit can't be evil. It's divine. However, it can be disproportionate. So what we're talking about in all of this is lower self has to be surrendering to higher self, but at the same time, higher self must be surrendering to what is beyond self, because otherwise we will develop more and more of a focus on self. And when we have an excessive focus on self, then there is less ability or less likelihood or less potential to focus on other. And other constitutes probably many more viewpoints and constitutes the greater part of the cosmos and constitutes something that is beyond our mere self. So the whole process, I wouldn't say that the self has been hardened, but the self has been exaggerated. And even in a spiritual sense, if we become too strong about our point of view and not our point of view relative to the viewpoint of the whole or of everyone else, we have caused a disproportion right within our own triune spiritual being that we cannot triangulate and we cannot have the full sense of our divine nature as long as we are focused only on one vertex of the triangle. You need at least two in order to know where you're at or where things are going. And so this has been, that's talk for tonight. Just a simple little list of all of the things that we have hardened. And the things that we, by jumping the gun and by doing so with excessive passion at that moment called temptation and fall in Lemuria, these are the things that we have taken to excess. These are the things that we have made too dense and have given them a life of their own. It's really ironic the way it works because we rebelled in such a way that we saw ourselves as different and separate and apart from God. You see it happen when you see kids rebelling when they get into their teenagers. I want no part of you. I'm not of you. You know what I'm saying? That very same thing is there. And we do our own exiling. We do our own separating. We do our own imprisonment. Because we really are in prison. We are gross. It's nice every now and then to be sensitive. It's nice every now and then to feel, a breeze of perfume from the spiritual reality and realize how coarse and how gross we are. All right, and each of these requires of us some activity for redemption. Next time we're going to go back to talking about philosophy of time again, and I'll try to figure out how to swing out of all of this much more quickly than swinging in. Yes.
But it comical thoughts about when I see certain things like that on the board. We're talking about the hardening, it hardens us, and then Freudian slips, and then you put down concrete thinking, concrete mind, and that thought came in. I was wondering if that's where the term cementing comes from.
Yeah.
I mean, really, it's more than a Freudian slip when you think about that.
Yeah. Carl Jung goes so far as Freud said that folklore had more truth to it. And how does the statement go? There's more truth in poetry, or there's more truth in poetry to that statement than is understood. Freud went even so far as to state that rumor had a lot of truth. The things that wouldn't come out any other way that were kept repressed, but through the whispers of rumor, everything came out. Interesting notion.
The other thought that occurred to me was in the third picture at the top. And he's looking kind of smugly, and I wonder if he got in old trouble because he looked down and said something like, well, a leaf is missing or something like that. And it got us started.
Yeah. Any other comments, questions? Psychopathology in Everyday Living. It's only about 70 pages long, and it's crisp reading. Oh, there are some examples in there that are just beautiful. He gives an example where he's riding along in a train car, and he's trying to make some point about the society doesn't appreciate what the younger generation is trying to give to posterity. He tries to quote some Latin phrase, and he gets the word wrong. And I believe the word is alquist or something like that. And he's been laughing sort of, smugly at Freud all the while that the conversation's been going on. And he says to him, "All right, you're supposed to be the brilliant psychiatrist and be able to tell me why I can't remember this word or why I'm remembering it wrong." And Freud just doesn't take his attack seriously at all. And he starts asking him, "Well, what sort of things are coming to your mind?" And he says, "Well, I think of alquist, I think of liquid." And he says, "When I think of liquid, I think of this small city in Italy where I come from, where there is a vial of blood from a saint, and that periodically this vial of blood leaves its crystalline state and it becomes liquid. And when it does, some very good thing is going to be happening to the city." And then the guy starts stuttering and fumbling, and Freud says, "Well, what's on your mind?" And the guy says, "Oh, it's nothing important." And Freud says, "Then you mean to say your girlfriend is Mr. Menzies?" And the guy turns white and he says, "How did you know that?" And he said, "Well, you were saying it all along. You were telling me that you had a contradiction in your consciousness about the whole concept." And he goes on and demonstrates. So the young man blows up and goes storming off, and Freud said, "I could have told him that the crux of the issue was what we give to posterity, because he was angry and he wanted her to abort the child. And the very man that was angry because society wasn't taking what the young people had to offer to posterity, that very man himself didn't want to offer a child to posterity. And when the two issues collided, that's when there was the symptomatic action, and it was a point of coincidence between the two contradictory things in himself. And I didn't do it justice, but it's really very beautiful the way he does all of those things, and how super intelligent we really are on the subconscious level, and even much more so on the superconscious level. Psychopathology in Everyday Living. Yes. Yes. He was also the first person to realize that not that plants didn't get everything or even most of their substance from the earth, but from the gas they got it. And he even was the first person to demonstrate that in the growth process of plants, that elements were transmuted. I think that there have been reproductions of those experiments that have been done by anthroposophists and other scientists that show that things are brought through different stages of the mineral evolution by the interaction with plants. And that's what I was trying to talk about before with the whole idea of biochemistry. because in biochemistry we can transmute the elements themselves from one state to another, and that really our physical body is a laboratory. And when we do hermetic sealing, we can do quite a bit inside of ourselves. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Does this have something to do with the like individuals when they suggesting that they could not come into that they came into being as gaseous forms, that would be the point at which that would be possible?
Yes. Yes. Something like that is what I'm beginning to understand, but it's vague for me at this point. I can understand the concept that far, but not a whole lot yet. Someday. Thank you very much.